We've been in business for over 30 years, and it took that long before I was able to buy my first GT40. It's one of those iconic cars that now that I've been able to taste it, drive it, and feel it, I don't think I'll ever be without one.
A couple years ago down at Phoenix when we got to buy that first GT40, that was something really special for both myself and my dad. I mean, to go drive in a GT40 and then to own one, that's a dream come true.
Shortly after I bought my first GT40, I bought another one. Problem with this car was it was done in golf livery and the car was never a golf car, but it was a special street car. It was the first production car to hit the shores of North America. The car had some really rare options. The crapshoot with this car was, what was the value after the car was done? Because it was such a unique car, was it going to bring regular street car money around $3.5 million? Or was it going to bring closer to competition money in the $5 million range? Either way, we needed to do a complete restoration and we wanted to do the car exactly the way it was when it left the factory.
I was actually able to find a lot of content on this car. I found pictures at Sebring, it was at St. Jovite, there was an article in Mechanics Illustrated, it was at the Ford Proving Grounds, there was actually a spread in Playboy, and there was a good article on the car too. So when the car first landed, it went straight to Ford for some development and then got paraded around as PR. Its first event was Sebring. They took it through the pits, they took it on the track. It was the first GT40 street car and they wanted to show it off.
Considering there's only 31 street cars ever produced, there's not a whole bunch of guys that have restored these cars. As we started digging into this restoration, we realized this car was going to be way more difficult than we originally thought. As we started the restoration on arguably the most significant street GT40 ever produced, we started to discover there were a lot of subtle differences between this and some of the other street cars.
One of the things we're always looking for is evidence of originality. So what we did is we started sanding through all the different layers of paint, and we were lucky this car was never stripped. So we went through all the layers, the blue, the black, the orange for the Gulf striping, the dark blue as it was painted in the 60s already by Ford, and underneath that we have the original silver paint. So now we're going to color map this to make sure that the color is exactly the same as the original paint. It's been kind of protected. It wasn't out in the sunlight for very long. I think we've got a real accurate color to go by. The other thing is a few things were changed early on with this car. While Ford still owned it, they opened up the wheel wells and made the wheel higher here. It could have been for clearance, it could have been for a number of reasons, but luckily we have 1058, which is a later street car, that we get to compare the body to. One of the other things we see is the way the fiberglass was here. You can see here, so the fact that it's cut away tells me, and the fact that this is raised, is maybe at some point they had a bigger tire on it, or they needed a clearance issue. I'm not sure, I'm just speculating on what it was. But we also get to compare the two noses and we can say, okay, this makes sense for this reason.
The body on a GT40 is fiberglass and it presents some unique problems. As you can see, this body has had a little bit of a hard life. All of these minor pinholes and scrapes and bangs really need to be dug out first, then filled, but in order to really keep things down so we don't have problems later, we need to lay a new layer of fiberglass over top. The fiberglass mat is resin into place, trimmed, sanded down, and then we have a really nice solid base to continue with. The chassis of a GT40 is steel, so once we got it blasted, we put it into epoxy primer.
Obviously the color is really important on this car, and we were lucky enough below all the other layers of paint to have the original color. So we sand it down, we polish it, and then we can color map it. But this one was so important, we called BASF and said, this one has to be bang on, and they did it in base clear for us.
The silver chrome paint color was unique just to 1028 and 1013, the two first street cars. As usual, extra care is taken in the spray booth to paint the car inside and out. Every nook and cranny has to be painted properly, and the car has to be painted apart. This is also the way GT40s were painted originally. The exhaust proved to be very difficult. We were able to find an original set of headers from 1967, but the rest of the exhaust was going to be handmade. We had to come up with a plan. We had a lot of great original photos, so we knew exactly what it should look like. However, what we had wasn't exactly that. Once we had a plan, we went about making the muffler. He did all of the baffling and all of the welding, getting the correct sizing, and then packing it with fiberglass so it sounds just like the original. Once we finished the muffler, we were lucky enough to have the original cover, which we checked against the photos. All it needed was to be polished. Now that we figured out the exhaust and built the muffler, I feel like we're going to be on schedule to get this car to auction on time. I just got a call from a fellow that asked if we would do a charity event at Mosport with the GT40. Problem is, it's a week and a half before we're going to ship the car to auction. It was all hands on deck, and we had to get the car finished a week and a half earlier than we had originally planned. We're not a shop that typically has deadlines or has to get things done at a certain time, but this was one rare exception, so it was all hands on deck. Teddy worked on the assembly of the suspension. The nice thing is we had everything ready. Everything was plated to the correct finish. All the hardware was already purchased or refinished exactly to the original photos. All of the original rotors and uprights had the correct finishes and they were ready to go. Calipers had already been rebuilt and all the pieces were bought, which makes assembly go a lot quicker. All of the plating had been done on the valve covers and the drive shafts. Everything was ready to install, and luckily we had pre-assembled all of the air conditioning bits so we knew they would all fit. While the boys were busy in the assembly shop, the paint shop was busy polishing the rest of the body so it would be ready once the motor got completely installed. A lot of the assembly requires two people to do it quickly and effectively. All of the wiring had already been assembled and the gauges were already in the dash. We constantly scanned original photos and original manuals to make sure all the right components and hardware were in place. The original bundle of snake tubes was something that I took great pride in. It took me almost 6 months to get them purchased from a fella that had an original set from his original GT40. The difference in front to rear tire size is amazing. All of the luggage boxes were original to this car. We were lucky enough, while Gary was doing the research, he contacted one of the owners who still had them in the attic. The crew at Legendary did a fabulous job. Everybody worked late, everybody really pitched in. It was a great effort by a bunch of guys who are passionate about cars.
You gotta go forward. You get that?
Teddy was pleased when he turned the key and the car finally fired for the first time in years. I thought the results of the restoration were outstanding, and the team at Legendary put in an extra effort, working late to make sure this car was perfect. But the real stamp of approval was going to come from the two guys that had known this car from new. We literally spent a couple of years restoring this GT40 to exactly the way it was when it left the factory.
You know, Gary did a ton of research on that car, and he came in my office and said, "You won't believe who paraded this car around in the early years." It was Paul Cook. When Gary was go-kart racing, Paul Cook was the guy in charge of all of FIA in Canada. So it's kind of neat to call him up and say, "Listen, we have a significant part of your youth here. You need to come out and check it out." The other cool thing is Epi Wietzes, who drove for Comstock back in the day, raced the original GT40s. He's coming out as well.
Is that how you remember?
Oh yeah. White pipes?
Yeah.
White pipes?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah. We got photographs of it.
Really?
White pipes.
Oh, white pipes.
We had white pipes.
Did we have white pipes?
It's always interesting to see an original owner have their memory tested on what they think was correct, even when you have photographic evidence.
I think today is a special day in my life. I'm 81 years old, but today I'm 30 again.
Went in the back shop where the car was and I couldn't believe my eyes. It's just gorgeous, gorgeous. I mean, the car's better now than it was in real life because of all the work that went into it. What was it, 4 years of restoration? Car just looks beautiful.
It was really cool seeing the expression on Paul and Eppie's face when they saw 1028 all finished. It took them back 50 years like that.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
It fits better than it did back then, right?
Yeah.
There's a vintage day at Mosport that Paul's really involved in, and he asked if we would bring the GT40 out. It would be great for their event, but more importantly, it was a great way for us to shake down the GT40 in a nice, safe environment. But Paul's a smart guy. He figured worst case scenarios, I'm gonna get a ride in that car.
As a fan of sports car racing as it was in the 60s, and as a race car driver myself, to be able to combine the two and take the GT40 to the racetrack, that was just unbelievable.
Gary and I carefully unloaded the GT40, and as we did, a small crowd gathered around. It was interesting to see their expression as we unloaded a $5 million car.
As we unloaded the car and moved it up into the pit area, a lot of people had gathered around. A lot of the guys knew exactly what this car was, and then there was a group of 18-year-old kids who just thought it looked like a super cool car. I was definitely excited to take this thing out to the track. A fresh restoration made me a little bit nervous, but to get to take a GT40 with Canadian history around Mosport, that's super special. Firing the thing up for the first time, I was a little bit nervous. This is definitely the most expensive car I've driven around the track, and probably with the most nervous passenger in the world.
I'm not a great passenger at the best of times, but this made me extremely nervous.
So anytime, like shaking down the car,
Yep.
all we're gonna do is cruise through all the gears,
Yep.
look at all the gauges, make sure oil pressure's good, water temp's good. You know, we'll do 1 or 2 laps and then bring it in and just go through and look at everything, okay?
Make sure the wheels are tight.
Yeah. Feels good though, huh?
It does. Thing is a race car. I was glad. Half a lap in, nothing had fallen off, the brakes work, every gear works, it's good. But it is a race car and it's just begging to be beat on.
Although this car drove like a race car, the restoration we had performed was more like a show car. However, we did want to make sure this car was capable of 170 miles an hour.
That's the other thing you gotta watch, because we found original set of brake lines, so they're good shape, but they're still 50-year-old brake lines.
Man, the pedals are tight.
Yeah. You can't be a big guy in these cars.
I don't think you could be much bigger than me.
Yeah. You really smell the fuel though, eh? The motor's right there.
Oh yeah. When Paul Cook drove this thing around the country from race to race, he wasn't much older than I am now. So to see him back in the car and him just remember that summer and talk about it, it was pretty special.
Now it was my turn, and this was the first time I was going to turn a wheel on this GT40. And what was really interesting was having the guy that used to drive this car from track to track when it was brand new as my passenger. As we pulled out of pit lane, I found it fascinating Paul went very quiet. He was just taking in the smell, the feel, and the sounds. I think a lot of memories came rushing back to him. Let's just open it up, right? Yeah.
What a day for memories. Remember we said it goes back, brings 50 years back all of a sudden? 50 years in a lap and a half. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Peter.
Anytime.
As I also said, you can throw the Viagra away.
Hey, thanks for helping us. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Yeah.
The interesting thing about this GT40, as special as it is the fact that it's got great history. It's got great history with guys that we knew a lot of years ago, both Paul Cook and Epi Wheatses, who were involved with the car brand new. The fact that Gary got really involved with this restoration and did a lot of research. I'll tell you what, GT40s are always going to be part of our business from now on, and I think the next one is going to be a great competition car.